Nice mug.
Thank you. It's labeled so I remember not to throw it in the harbor.
It's good to have got the tone kind of sorted for this, because I've just been interviewing Michael Rowe. I'm going to leave this I'm going to do an extended cut of this and leave this so that people can see the nonsense that goes on beforehand. I've just been doing an interview with Michael Rowe and Kate Asprey about Napoleon's 100 Days. Properly kind of academic, high level, bring your A game. Don't say anything stupid like I would normally do. Kind of stuff. And then we sit down and do something very different.
Yeah, we happy few, we band of fuckwits.
Hello and welcome back to the Napoleonic Wars pod. We return for another State of the Union. We should probably come up with an alternative name for the follow-ons, shouldn't we? But hey, we haven't done that, so we won't. Luke Reynolds is back in the house, and we are going to talk in one of these more informal sessions. The idea of this series is to, I guess, sort of take a step back and remember what the day job entails, but also talk about sort of some of the fun stuff, some of the challenges of the job, exciting things that are developing. It all sounds very wishy-washy, but there is a point to it. It is kind of like meant to be part fanzine, part news bulletin, part us whining about how difficult it is to be paid to do a job that we love day by day.
I mean, I think at least partially it's designed to give people a glimpse behind the scenes, right? Because as I said to you before, you have any number of brilliant scholars on your podcast, but usually you get them on when they've finished the book, when they're pushing the book, when they're pushing their research. And so one of the things that you sold this to me on, or maybe I invented it and sold myself on it, is just sort of getting an idea of what's going on before we get to the selling the book part.
That was the rationale. We'll go with that one. That
okay. We'll go with that.
Okay, we're sorted. Welcome to the Napoleonic Wars pod.
This is okay. So if we're taking up if we're going for a different term than State of the Union, and we're going to do a bunch of these, is this the second coalition?
Oh, the second coalition. This is good. So there we go. Hello and welcome to the State of the Union, the second coalition. There we go. We'll make that a seamless edit, I'm sure.
Excellent. Yes. No. Definitely.
I'll be bothered to make an edit of that. So you're not only getting an indication of the research process, you're also getting an indication of just how apocalyptically badly organized this show is. I once again have scholar in residence / assistant associate deputy editor producer. What was the title that I gave? What's the latest of them?
Assistant producer, periodic co-host, and scholar in residence.
Mate, you're collecting more titles on this show than Napoleon's generals. Quite frankly.
When do I get a dukedom and a marshal's baton? That's what I want to know.
When I can afford one, which means you'll have to wait a while because I haven't got one for myself.
No, that's very valid, and we don't want you breaking in and stealing the ones in Apsley House.
I mean, it's me. Surely they'll just give me one for free.
Nah, well, we'll see.
Right?
I have to say, actually, on that point, and this is a complete, we're already into the weeds already, but I think this is worth noting.
In the weeds, never.
Never. We spend more time in the high grass and the rifles do. If you go to Apsley House, most of what is pitched there is the sort of the London seat of the Dukes of Wellington, and they're, Georgian rooms. They're beautifully put. There's an amazing art collection. But the one sort of museum room on the ground floor is, I don't remember if it's the plate room, the treasure room. I don't even remember what they call it. And it's full of all of the plate services and all of the gorgeous, metallic art that has been produced, given to him, commissioned by the first Duke. There's a small cabinet, a small display case on the wall on the left as you go in. And compared to everything else, it's actually relatively modest. It's only about the size of a regular computer monitor. And inside, there are 7, I believe, field marshals' batons. And the next time you go there, guys, just pause and take a look at that case, because while they are gorgeous and while they are special, sort of special in terms of artistic there, the thing you have to remember is that those 7 batons, more than almost anything else in that building, represent how everything else got into that building. That case, that small case, represents how he built his name and how he built his fortune. Everything else in that building that doesn't stem from his own genius and his intellect and his ability to manage stems from that little case. So the next time you're in there, I know it's tempting to go right for the Dresden porcelain. I know it's tempting to go right for the portrait gallery, all of that. But just take a minute and tip your hat to that small case with the 7 batons in it.
You've raised the tone no end already. So now permit me to lower the tone.
To lower it.
Yeah, indeed. So we sort of have a woolly plan with these, and some of the features that we do are kind of reactions to stuff. Some of it will be, as Luke has said, in a much better way than I am. I mean, I did say to you, do you want to run this? And you basically said yes. You didn't insult me on this occasion. You're mellowing. But yeah, so
I'm holding fire.
Well, yes. Don't speak too soon, Zach.
I'm waiting until you're 50 yards away and then making sure not to aim too high.
80 yards is plenty close enough.
All right, that's fair.
You don't want to actually, even if I did get within 50 yards, you would be entirely safe from me returning fire, because to quote Blackadder, I couldn't hit a barn door with a... Actually, it's not Blackadder, is it? It is Rowan Atkinson.
It is Rowan Atkinson.
I couldn't hit a barn door with a banana, which is much funnier when Rowan Atkinson says it. He just is. But what we're going to do is one of those blind reactions to start off with, and there is a point to this, and it's not entirely self-indulgent. This is a world exclusive. Luke hasn't seen this. I desperately... Part of the reason that we're late recording this and why anarchy is integral to this episode is that I was basically trying to finish it before we came on air to record this and didn't quite finish the editing, so there's a key element missing. But Luke is getting a world exclusive first ever... Look, I'm trying to build it up, but it's really not that exciting. Watch this, but fans of the show, you're going to get ever so slightly excited about this because you made this happen. Waterloo, central Belgium. On the 18th of June 1815, a battle took place here which would change the course of history. It was a clash that ended a quarter of a century of bloodshed, as the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte was defeated for the final time by an Anglo-Dutch army under the British Duke of Wellington and a Prussian force under Marshal Blucher. Waterloo was so important that its name has become embedded in our culture, from railway stations to entire cities and even pop songs. But what actually happened here? Why have some of those who fought in this tumultuous clash been written out of the story? And more than 200 years after the guns fell silent, why does Waterloo still matter? I'm Dr. Zach White, Napoleonic historian and battlefield guide. I've spent more than a decade studying the period, and I'm fascinated by the stories of the ordinary men and women who became embroiled in this conflict. In this series, I want to show you the battlefields of the Waterloo campaign like you've never seen them before. Using cutting-edge drone technology, we'll be going off the beaten track to trace the footsteps of those who fought here and hearing from them in their own words. We'll relive the fear of combat, the elation of victory, and the sorrow of loss that was felt over the course of this frenetic 4-day campaign. Along the way, we're going to explode common myths that have changed the way we talk about the battle, and perhaps most importantly, we're going to restore those who have been pushed to the sidelines to their rightful place at the heart of the Waterloo story. Waterloo by air, coming to the Napoleonic Wars channel sometime this summer. Hopefully, first installment out in time for Waterloo. Probably one episode a month of many, many months, quite frankly, because I'm only going to make one Waterloo documentary, certainly self-shot Waterloo documentary in my lifetime. So I'm going to do it properly, or attempt to at least. Thoughts?
I mean, it did come through. There was some artifacting, there was some clipping. I look forward to seeing the full trailer when you've put it up on YouTube properly. But it looks great. I love the idea. It is using technology that even 10 years ago you would have had to pay a helicopter pilot to do, and you would have had inevitably a noise complaint going on. So yeah, and I love the idea of sort of the untold voices. You know, I've been a fan of this. I pushed some of this a little bit in our Waterloo Live, talking about Charlotte Waldy, Roxburgh. You know, arguably the first sort of chronicler of Waterloo, who happens to be a Scottish woman. And so I'm entirely in favor of this, and it looks great. Your footage looks incredible, nice and sunny. Bright. Good to see a little bit of Liam there, even if he is charging the camera. Yeah, no, I'm excited. I am absolutely excited. This is going to be great.
So yes, it is the culmination of a lot of work. I say culmination; it's an ongoing thing. I might get some guy called Luke Reynolds in at some point to talk about memory and stuff, because apparently they wrote a book about Waterloo. I have no idea if they're good, but
I hear they're incredible on camera.
Well, I haven't heard those rumors. I've heard other rumors.
That's fair as well. That's fair as well. He's a very modest individual, I can tell you that much.
Okay. You're a credible source on this, are you? But yeah, it was. I mean, I'm conscious that some of this goes out on radio. So what folks won't be aware of is that a lot of that featured drone footage. Some footage shot with camera on the ground. The bulk of it drone footage, though. And the idea is exactly what it says on the tin. You know, you don't call it Waterloo by air and then tell the story from the ground. So it will be a very detailed, multi-installment documentary, released as a series of sort of 10 to 12-ish minute segments. And we're going to start with the start of the campaign. Well, realistically, we'll kind of do overview of campaign, set the scene, get Luke in to talk about memory, and then kind of go into Catchabar and Ligny. And we are doing all of them. So we will do Catchabar, we will do Ligny, and we will do Wavre alongside Waterloo, although I don't have decent drone footage for Wavre, partly because there's a massive water amusement park right next door. So that's challenging.
I mean, that formed the pivotal right flank of Blucher's defense, didn't it?
It did
the water
indeed.
park.
Tillman's Third Corps were posted at the top of the roller coasters, as memory serves. Really important kind of vantage point to lay down fire on.
Honestly, you put a couple of companies of Jaegers on top of a modern roller coaster, they are going to command the area around there.
It's a known thing. The other problem, of course, is Ligny is basically, well, one half of the battlefield is basically on the climb out from Charleroi Airport, and folks may not be familiar with the rules and laws on drone flight, but don't fly them underneath like an approach to an airfield is integral to them.
Yeah, especially given the fact that in the past 2 to 3 years we have seen drones become a crucial part of warfare.
Indeed.
And I don't mean predator drones that have been a crucial part of warfare for 20 years. I mean drones of exactly the size that Zach has been flying, that have become, first they were there as inevitably as scouting vehicles, and then much like the progression of air war in the First World War, right? They start as unmanned scouting vehicles, and then we slowly figure out how to kill each other with them. That is the human condition.
That is the way of war. People have decided,
so
hey, look, I can strap explosives to this and do some damage.
There you go. So you've been working with drones for about a year at this point?
Yeah, about a year.
About a year. And I do remember a deep, important conversation about what to name your drone,
Oh
which is
yes.
obviously the first crucial decision that every would-be drone pilot and historian has to decide on. But let's actually talk about this, because we tend to spread this image that what we do, and it's not just us that does this, but it's just the general idea that we are knee deep in paper, that we are knee deep in quills, that we are dragged into technology kicking and screaming. But we historians in many ways are at, I'm not going to say the forefront, but we are among the more aggressive academic disciplines when it comes to using this, or at least portions of us are. Text search, things like that, OCR. Obviously, we still have a massive social media presence. But yeah, let's talk about this. So, how have you found working with drones, and how have you found it to benefit your work / your research?
Yeah, so drone flight is a funny thing because I'm doing this whole documentary style thing of look what we can learn by using a drone on a battlefield. And I would be the first to acknowledge that actually you can understand the story of a battlefield without taking a drone up to 100 meters and having a scout around. It's not necessary. However, that doesn't necessarily render the entire project pointless. And there are a couple of reasons for this. The most obvious one is this is a working landscape. And I think that's sometimes forgotten about by some folks. You do occasionally see people boasting on social media of, oh, look, I'm awfully hard. I can carry out a small piece of trespass. And yes, you can, people. It is against the law. And if you end up trampling on somebody's crops, you are having a direct impact on somebody's livelihood,
Yeah.
because time has moved on
Mm-hmm.
and farmers make a living out of this landscape. And you can sit and debate the pros and cons of that, but it does actually make the landscape accessible in a different kind of way, because it hasn't become wilderness, it hasn't been built on. And
Yeah.
so actually we owe these guys a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that you can't, you know, respectfully walk along margins and boundaries between fields and all the rest of it. You can explore the landscape, but just barreling into a wheat field, going, "Oh, I'm a historian and I want my social media content and I want this picture of this particular thing." That's not the way to do things.
No.
And a drone inevitably is the single easiest way to navigate that problem, because
Yeah.
now you don't need to walk that field because you can fly it. And what's even better is you can fly it at multiple heights. So you can bring a drone down to eye height of an infantryman. You can bring it up to cavalry height, or you can take it all the way up to 120 meters, which is the legal operating ceiling, particularly within the UK, for certain classifications of drone. If you're going above 120 meters, you need to start looking at different types of classification and different licenses and all the rest of it. There are laws that you need to abide by and research beforehand. You need to know what you're doing, but it does mean that you can quite literally trace these guys' footsteps, which is
Mm-hmm.
what I'm alluding to in the trailer. You can
Yeah.
quite literally follow, as I do, Derlon's Corps, but follow it division by division. What's First Division's perspective? What's Fourth Division's perspective?
Yeah.
The French cavalry charges. What does it look like to be Milot coming across, reforming on the French left, and then advancing up the slope? Um, and that's a useful perspective because it enables you to start to ask and answer different questions. You can start to consider, well, at what point would Ney have been able to see the British retreating? So if you want this question about why does Ney supposedly go rogue and hurl the French cavalry against the Allied ridge, is it because of this idea that he sees um, Wellington's entire army pull back and therefore confidently screams
Yeah.
Wellington retreats, a la the 1970 film Waterloo? And you realize that actually it's only when you pass through about 80 meters of elevation that you can see what's happening on the reverse slope, which again gives you some interesting
Yeah.
answers about what people could and couldn't see.
Yep.
Then you also, of course, have to use your imagination slightly and, stick in gun smoke for a start. But it does mean that there are these interesting perspectives, and it enables you to scout much faster and get different perspectives on the lie of the land that you can't get, partly because you can't get into the field without ruining somebody's livelihood, but also you can travel ground much faster. My drone's top speed is a sprightly 12 meters per second. Nobody's pretending it's going to break the land speed record, but what it does mean is that actually you can, from one position, scout quite a lot of an area much faster, which
Hmm.
has its uses.
Yeah. I just want to throw a couple of things on there. Inevitably, slight digressions. But first and foremost, the whole thing about drones allow you to explore the land without damaging it. Right. This is a breakthrough that we and farmers have been gagging for several centuries. Right. Let's be very real about this. Just to dig into my own research. The Wellington tree, the Wellington elm, the tree of victory, whatever names you want to call it, was eventually cut down around 1818 by the farmer in whose land it was, because everyone kept trampling over to it, to the point where, and I quote, this is a letter from a guy by the name of Children, it wasn't written by children, that produce of half an acre of land was annually lost in consequence. So tourists were just walking over there. They were stripping bark off the tree. They killed it eventually, and that was one of the reasons it was cut down. But they were destroying half an acre of land, right? So this is not a new idea. But the other thing that you mentioned that I really do want to pick up on, because it is crucial, right? We tend to think about this, as sort of, we have endless artwork, we have endless sort of recreation, imagination. But one of the reasons that things like the 1970 Waterloo or Sharp or anything like that is so popular is because we are inherently visual creatures. And it allows us an insight. And what drone footage does, and you sort of touched on this, but it is worth iterating. Drone footage is the best way that someone of any age, of any ability, can feel what it was like to go across a battlefield at full gallop on a horse. We can get that exact height, we can get that exact speed, and we can go hell for leather. And that is something that it will give you, for example, an understanding of just how fast or how slow a horse at full gallop covers a piece of ground. Something that is inherently crucial if you're trying to figure out what it was like to face infantry, or what it was like to cover ground and things like that. So there are forms of understanding here, because we can talk to cavalrymen, we can talk to horse racers, and we can go, okay, a horse of this size, of this breed, can cover X amount of ground in 20 seconds. That's a number. We're not really able to process that. Right? There's a very big difference between hearing a car goes 240 kilometers an hour and being in a car going 240 kilometers an hour. So the number is one thing, but the number allows us to then extrapolate and create the footage to give us an idea of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm forever talking about the need to play sort of historical whack-a-mole with misconceptions and myths. That's
also
not
easier with a drone. It can just bounce around.
Indeed. But we've got so many myths, particularly with Waterloo, and I'm very conscious that I've made a bit of a name for myself as one of the people who's sort of followed entirely in Gareth Glover's footsteps. Let's not make any bones about this. He has blazed the trail.
He has.
And I've picked up his book and gone, this is chuffing brilliant, and, proclaimed that everybody should read it. But we have a lot of misconceptions about Waterloo, particularly. We have a misconception about battles anyway. And there's nothing like bringing the battlefield to the conversation.
Yeah.
And I've had sit down rather than stand up, partly because we were inside a car, sit down arguments with people, and they will know who they are, about, were the guns in this position or were the guns in that position? And I maintain that I am absolutely right, because the historical record backs me up, Todd. But
Yes, but Todd believes that Napoleon won, so it's a false position to start from.
Well, there is that, but then he's influenced by the Waterloo gift shop, so
That is very fair. Yeah, no. If you base it on the number of busts, then Napoleon absolutely did win.
he did indeed.
My favorite example of this, and we've talked about this before. I think I've brought this up on either this or another podcast, the two of us before, is the whole discussion of, well, the French army broke because it saw the Imperial Guard break. And
can I just say, what utter fucking shit? And I don't swear much on this show, but that is the biggest crock of horseshit anybody has ever spouted about Waterloo. And you're dead right. And then I did a talk about this. I was very privileged to be invited to York St John Uni. Big thanks to Graham Callister for facilitating that, where I made this point, perhaps laboured it to death ever so slightly, because I've taken a drone up at Papilot, and you know exactly where the Imperial Guard were positioned, because the Lion's Mound marks the point where the first wave.
Also, there's those big blue rectangles that move across the field constantly.
You're familiar, yeah, absolutely.
And they're there permanently. No one knows this, but the maps aren't maps; they're actually aerial photographs.
They are.
So they lay out these giant blue blocks and arrows, and it gets tedious, but it works.
I mean, it's a whole like fancy lighting display. It must have cost a lot in terms of investment. But the point is,
don't get me onto Waterloo Spectacle. You'll never shut me up.
No, we'll save that for another episode, I suspect. Although with you, we might need an entire series, because once we start you off, I'm not sure we'll ever get you to stop.
Wind me up and let me go.
Indeed. But the point is, you can, and it's one thing to be able to stand there and go, look, you can see the Lion's Mound. But then people start sort of complaining about, well, line of sight and blah, blah, blah. If you take a drone up to, let's say, 20 meters, you can then turn around to people and say, well, look, you can barely see the Lion's Mound. You sure as hell can't see the Imperial Guard running away on a clear day where nobody's been firing gunpowder weapons for the course of 10 hours to completely obscure your view. And it's at that point, I think, that the realization hits. And I passionately believe that we should always be looking to embrace the opportunities offered by new technology. I'm admittedly somebody who's dyed in the wool about this because of my obsession with databases, and what we can process now couldn't have been processed 20 years ago, quite frankly.
There were books 20 years ago that were praised because they did what we can now do in seconds.
Yeah.
And it took people years. It was an entire form of history that has now just become a standard form of research.
Part of the reason why All for the King's Shilling by Ed Koss continues to stand out is because if you did it today, it would be a huge undertaking of research. It would be much more feasible today, but within the context of when Ed was putting this together, bearing in mind that he published the book in 2010, so the research would have been sort of 2005-ish. We are talking an era where digital cameras weren't all the rage. You didn't have high definition photography, so you've either got to sit there and transcribe it yourself, or
which he did,
or you got to take the old Polaroid photos of everything and try and work off of those, which is not feasible, believe me.
No, it is not.
Unless you do like a third of a page for each photo and have a bazillion films that you get developed. So, we need to continue to remain relevant, he says, as somebody in his 30s presenting a podcast like the vast majority of people in their 30s, it would seem.
I mean, in fairness, a vast majority of white males in their 30s.
Yep. It's become a thing, and I have conformed to that stereotype. But
on the visual side as well, I do want to bring up another example of this. It's a story I've heard repeatedly, and it also brings back Todd, loyal supporter of the channel, in a slightly more beneficial light. Look, Todd, Zach, and I are all friends. We all joke with each other. He knows that it wasn't meant in any aggressive way. But I remember having a conversation with him about Salamanca, and him talking about you actually hammering this home to him. that moment of, you know, Wellington's like, that will do by God, and just the sheer level of insight and maneuvering and all of that, because it's not, you can't just click a button. It's not that will do by God. You hit a button and, you know, the Exocet missile launches. That's not how this works. You know, so, you know, there are, it's not just at Waterloo, it's at other levels, at other places, that this level of insight, and it doesn't even have to be ones where the British fought. There were, funnily enough, battles in the Napoleonic Wars the British were not at.
Yeah,
I'd love.
Matter.
Oh God. I mean, I'd love to see. I would love to see some drone footage of Leipzig, if only because there was no footage of it in Ridley Scott's Napoleon, because it didn't exist.
I would like to do actual Austerlitz and do.
Oh yeah,
of the two.
That would be incredible.
He used the same site that he recorded the Gladiator fight.
I thought those hills looked familiar.
Yeah, that's, if you know, you look at it and go, yeah, I can kind of see what's going on there. Let's not go down the Ridley Scott line.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's very fair.
So yeah, fundamentally, and I was asked this after the talk, you know, historians sometimes are brilliant at working across disciplines and across new technologies, and sometimes they're absolutely awful. But history should be a multidisciplinary discipline. You know, it shouldn't just be, as you said at the start of this segment, about bits of paper and pretty pictures, and there, you know, lies the full stop and nothing else. You know, we should be, and I think are, talking to archaeologists. This is part of the beauty of the drone, I guess, that the drone can cover more ground than an archaeological dig can cover. We get very different insights, obviously. But Waterloo is an example of a battlefield that has been studied well when it comes to archaeology, hasn't been ruined in quite the same way that the majority have. Vittoria being a classic example. I think most of Leipzig's been built over as well.
It is. It absolutely is.
I think you've got like apartment blocks that definitely weren't occupied by the rocket core. Well, that's the point, actually. The British were at Leipzig. The experimental rocket core were there. Not sure they did a great deal.
Has the experimental rocket core ever done a great deal?
The gentleman of the whatever the successor unit for the rockets will no doubt be knocking on your door, strong-arming you to convince you that is not the case.
Look, rockets became the definitive form of artillery eventually. I am not arguing that in the slightest.
Not for another 130 years.
But exactly, that's the thing, right? You know, yes, they are there, and they were very effective even then as a terror weapon, because it was a lot of sound and fury, and every once in a while it signified that you were about to lose a limb.
I mean, they're basically glorified fireworks. I'm sorry, but that's essentially what they are during this point, and they are dangerous weapons.
They're very dangerous. They're very dangerous weapons.
Yeah.
There's an example of one that's fired at Vauxhall Gardens at one of the Waterloo commemorations, and they bolt it to the ground, because if they don't. No, it doesn't actually. It does actually stay there, because they bolt it with like full-on chains. Because if they don't, they'd set half of South London on fire.
They're a menace. They're an absolute menace.
They are.
And they tried to integrate these into naval warfare. You just got to love the more in terms of amphibious assaults. So they used Richard Tennant did some research on this. I'm now trying to remember where they used it. It might be Sicily in 1806. I might have got that wrong. But just the goal, the idea that, I mean, in principle, if you just deal with the theory, lovely idea. In practice, very much not so. You know, maybe we need an episode on the rocket core. Maybe I need.
That would be spectacular. Let's do that, because hey, I'm an assistant producer. Let's do that. Yeah, because it's one of those things that captures imagination. And I think, honestly, if it had been more effective, it would be spoken of in the exact same tone as the rifle cord is, because it's different enough and it captures the imagination enough.
I mean, this is one of the things that I think, and I'm granted, this is a thought that's occurred to me off the top of my head, but I think the British don't do too badly at in terms of experimenting.
Mhm.
Now, people might turn around to me and say, yeah, but the Royal Navy in relation to what happens in the War of 1812, and yes, granted, the sort of they're not sort of super heavy frigates, but the heavier style of
Mhm.
frigate that the Americans build is a far superior thing to what
Yes, it is.
the British are floating. But that's because the British are floating a navy that was built about half a century earlier.
Yep.
Think about when victory is laid down. I believe it's 1760, I want to say.
Yeah.
This is ultra early Georgian navy. So sure, the Americans much better when it comes to their frigates. But I'm thinking the rifles. I'm thinking shrapnel, particularly, which the French
Yes.
didn't make work.
Yes.
They tried and they couldn't work out the fusing for it. Sure, the rocket core is a dud, but you're gonna get some duds in the process of
Mhm.
experimenting. And so there is perhaps a small spirit of being willing
I
to
mean, there's an
try
argument
something.
that Britain wins India because they make sepoys work when the French don't.
That is a very good point, actually.
Yeah.
We may
And
come back to that
yeah,
later in this episode.
can't imagine
Uh,
why. And I'm to be clear, I am not saying that an entire, that soldiers recruited on the ground in India are a form of technology, but in terms of experimentation, military control, they
mm.
absolutely do fit into that.
And the East India Company core is decent in terms of looking at different ways of doing things. We're
They
starting to
are.
get into a whole other section, but hold that thought and we'll come back to it. But
Yeah,
yeah, there
yeah,
is a spirit of, do we have to necessarily do it the army way, or
yeah.
can we do it a different way?
Yeah,
Um,
and
that does seem
it's
to be
inherently also one of those things that really does highlight the sort of the pseudo damage that the legacy of Waterloo does in terms of we won this battle, therefore we don't ever need to change again.
yeah,
Because you get to the Crimea and it's the French that are making all of the changes. Right, they're the ones with the mini A ball. They're the ones with the sort of are pushing reform in many ways that the British have to almost lose a war in order to do.
yeah. This is the long shadow of Wellington, and I know criticizing Wellington doesn't make you popular in certain circles, but this is that kind of cozy complacency that descends. Look, we won the
Hmm.
Peninsula War, we won Waterloo,
Yeah,
we bested what was undeniably the greatest army on the continent, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of thing. But complacency is dangerous.
yes, it is.
And the British, I think an argument can be made that into the Victorian period, the British generally kind of lose a step. I'm thinking about HMS Warrior now. Um, the revolutionary in its concept of how it was built. Basically, you've got this what they called, I think, the iron box in the heart of the ship, and then they build the ship
Yeah,
around it. The idea being that nothing's going to breach that that iron box. It is effectively the next step beyond victory,
yeah,
um, and because no shot is going to penetrate it, you don't need to worry about stacking it with sheer firepower because this thing will just endure.
yeah.
Now, the trouble with Warrior was, of course, she did not sail well,
No, she did
um,
not.
to the point that she wallowed so badly that in early sea trials, they found that the tips of the rigging were brushing the waves.
Hmm.
And you've got men in a boiler room. This is something that they do really well on Warrior. If you're ever in Portsmouth, let me know first of all, and go and see Warrior, which is literally like 10 minutes from my office. But when you're on board, they have these living historians who do not break character. There's nothing you can do to get them
Mm.
to break character. And I tried to have just a really nice, genuine conversation, historian to reenactor, about what you're
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
here is fantastic. And they still stay in character of, "God blimey, thank you, sir," for the guy who's playing the guy in the boiler room. And the officer sort of doing this very sort of stiff upper lip, "Sir, ma'am," sort of thing. Um, and they really do bring this home that actually, if you are in the boiler rooms stoking these fires, coal
Hmm.
fires, as the ship is wallowing around, you're going to burn
Yes.
substantial parts of your body.
Yes.
So the British, eventually, where I'm going with this waffle is the British lose out to the French in terms of the whole race for naval supremacy into the Victorian period. So that spirit of development perhaps isn't there in quite the degree that it needed to be going forwards.
Mm,
But then, as you say, Crimea comes along and we get another
yeah.
kind of step forward.
Yeah. I mean, Crimea is one of those. It's you get it there, you get it in the U.S. Civil War almost simultaneously, and then you get it to a certain extent in the Franco-Prussian, definitely in the Russo-Japanese, and then in World War One. It's the sort of this 60, 70 years where conflict is marked by this really, really nasty mix where the technology has moved on, but the tactics haven't.
Yeah.
And when that happens, people die. You pay that price in the flesh of your soldiers.
Yes, I mean World War One is very much fought with a complete lack of understanding of
Yeah.
how the picture has changed, and nobody can work
Mhm.
out how to respond to this changing picture.
And what blows my mind is that if you read the reports that come out of the Russo-Japanese War, everyone was warned about it.
Same story
Everyone was
actually with the
warned.
Boer War.
Yeah.
There are warnings of it, and it's very easy for us to sit back with hindsight and go, "Oh well, this was terribly obvious." It just wasn't to them at the time.
Yeah.
Um, and that's not to say that people didn't try to find solutions to it, but not very successfully, because they're still getting to grips with what this technology can do in
Yeah.
an environment where the nature of the war means you're pushing that technology further
Mhm.
at the whole
Yes.
time. So even as you think you're starting to achieve something that can work with the first mark of a particular type of weapon system, by the time you've implemented the tactics and the training to make that work, actually, there can be a Mark 6 or a Mark 7 coming off the production lines that
Mhm.
changes the face of what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Aircraft production during the Second World War, well, actually during the First World War as well,
Yeah.
but particularly during the Second World War is a classic example of this. Think about how we start out with really the Hurricane. I know everybody
Mhm.
gets very kind of misty-eyed about the Spitfire, but first flight was in 36. So really the bulk of the RAF's fleet was Hurricanes.
Yes, they were.
Um, and then by the end of it, you're talking the British using the Gloucester Meteor, but the king of the skies, frankly, is the Me-262,
Yeah.
produced by the Germans, which is just a different classification of
Yeah.
weapon.
And
It's
then
it's
and then
entirely
and
different.
then, you go 5, 6 years and you've got the Korean War and you have the first evidence of jet dogfighting. Um, and in that sort of end of World War II to the Korean War, you do have some mistakes, like those. I forget which plane it is that outran its own bullets and therefore shot itself down.
I haven't heard of that one, but that's
Yeah, I believe it was. It might be an urban legend, but I'm 95% sure it was at least a test flight where this thing was going so quickly it fired its machine guns or its cannons and literally caught up with the bullets.
less than ideal for sure.
Suboptimal, definitely
Yeah,
suboptimal.
yeah, yeah,
Reminds me, obviously, that the other version of that obviously is until we get the interrupter switch in World War One. You can't have the propellers with the
yeah,
machine guns firing through it because they will shred it.
yeah.
Uh,
So you've got to mount your guns entirely differently, which then, of
exactly.
course, makes sighting a whole other
Yeah,
thing.
whole other thing.
What I always find baffling as well is that there is a period from 1945 up to sort of the mid 50s, I believe, where people are genuinely considering how they can integrate nuclear weapons into their tactical doctrine.
Yep.
And that blows my mind
Yep.
that people are seriously contemplating how is this going to work? If I remember rightly, during the Korean War, MacArthur is seriously contemplating
Yes.
whether or not he can get away with nuking China.
Yeah, I mean MacArthur is seriously contemplating doing whatever he can to beat China. That's what he wants. That's what he wants his legacy to be. And that is fundamentally why the People's Volunteer Army, the PVA, crosses the Yalu River and comes to the aid of the North Koreans. As I explain to my classes when I teach this, it's just like, all right, put it in the other foot. You have America watching a Chinese coalition army march its way up Mexico. Do you think we're not crossing the Rio Grande? Of course we're crossing the Rio Grande. That's not happening.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's always very different when the shoe is on the other foot. And I
exactly.
think sometimes that, we've come a long way from the Napoleonic
You
Wars.
know, and it's funny because this really does tie into to our next point, and I think it's a really nice setup. Obviously there are historians of the First World War, there are historians of the Second World War, there are historians of the Korean War who are screaming into their podcast device of choice, sort of going, "What will these two idiots stop talking about what they don't know?" But it does really play into a point that I've been wanting to talk about. When you pitched the idea of this series to me, this was one of the things that popped into my head. It's something we should talk about because it's a question I get all the time, and that is sort of, how do you decide what you're going to write next? How do you decide what you're going to work on next? And I joke with I've made this joke a dozen times. It's sort of, historians experience mission creep. We do experience it. And if you talk to a lot of historians, and this is especially true in the military, but it's not just in the military, you will find historians that slowly over the course of their career will move either forwards or backwards in time. They'll find a border and then they'll cross it and they'll go to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So yeah, let's actually talk about this, because it's a question that I get asked a lot, and it's something I want to talk about, which is, all right, you finished the project, you finished the book, you finished the article. What do you decide you're doing next? How do you move on? What is next, and how does that decision get made?
See, there is what should be the correct answer to this, and that correct answer should be sleep. But that's not really the look of disbelief on Reynolds' face here. You
What an
missed this,
unprecedented idea.
but actually, I'm kind of right, because we just don't stop, and that's part of our problem.
It is.
But you're dead right, and this is precisely, I suspect, why we experience mission creep. And it's not necessarily a bad. Well, lack of sleep is obviously detrimental for your health. So that's not what I mean by that's not necessarily a bad thing. But the notion that you can sort of creep from one idea to the next actually is good. But sometimes you can also achieve sort of breakpoints and see changes and go down other avenues. Part of the problem with that, of course, is that it becomes quite, inverted commas, seductive to stay in what you know and what you're known for.
Yep.
So I had a conversation with an expert a number of years ago. This conversation was with an expert on the slave trade and slavery in the British Empire and across the Atlantic world. And he'd reached a point, Christopher Petley's his name, he's now a professor at Southampton Uni. He'd reached a point where he'd written most of what he wanted to write for now on slavery, the institution, abolition, and all the rest of it. And he was thinking about the next big thing that he wanted to do. And he was basically having a conversation with himself in his head about, did he want to become a historian looking at massive shifts in economy that are compelled upon a nation with a view to using that to perhaps have something valuable to say in relation to climate change, i.e. this idea that across the world we could do with majorly restructuring our economies to not be dependent on fossil fuels. That is the way that we've gone. We've ditched the horse and cart, and we've moved on to the horsepower and all the rest of it in a different sense. And the challenge is now to try and wean us off of that. And he kind of made the point that in some respects, the Western economies have to do something similar in the 19th century when they've become dependent on the sugar and tobacco trade through slavery in order to generate income. And then suddenly that institution is no longer legal. And somebody needs to work out, is sugar still profitable? Is tobacco still profitable? What are we going to do about it now that we can't use slave labor anymore? This is an awful challenge for us. And it's precisely the argument that's being bandied around in Parliament pre-abolition. Is it practical do we have to gently wean ourselves off of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
slavery, which is part of the idea behind abolition of the trade,
Yeah.
but maintaining the state of slavery
Mhm.
itself, um, and all kinds of considerations
Yeah.
around that. And so he wanted to achieve this kind of this clean break, and use some ideas that he had to inform a fresh kind of avenue of research. I'm not sure quite where we went with it in the end. I left Southampton before I caught up with him to see where he'd gone. So that's one way of doing things, is to just go, I'm going to do this instead.
Yeah.
And I've got, don't get me wrong, ideas along those lines. I will at some point be writing a new history of the Peninsular War in the style of Oman, but done properly. So for folks who aren't familiar, Charles Oman wrote oh God, is it 7 or 8 volumes of a history of the Peninsular War? Volume 1, everybody says, is naff, which I think is fair enough.
Mm.
But I think a lot's changed in the
Oh,
last
yeah.
20 years, really. I mean, the last significant study, I know Andrew Bamford is writing a history of the Peninsular War, that will be a single volume affair. But the last major published study of this was Charles Estelle, right?
Yeah.
2003, I believe it was. Peninsular War, a
21
New
years
History.
ago.
So nearly a quarter of a century.
Yeah,
And within that quarter of a century, we've had a mass
we
digitization
have.
of
No, we absolutely
material.
have.
And Charles, don't get me wrong, does a fantastic job of considering the Spanish perspective and the Portuguese perspective alongside the British and the French. But now that we have so much more material,
Yeah.
there is now a chance to revisit Oman and do the whole thing as a multi-series
Mhm.
group of books. So
And
that's
I'm just gonna say this right off the bat. If you are, Zach will get this, will get this criticism, but you may also be at your podcast device screaming into this, saying, "We don't need this. We have Omen." When Omen was writing this, people were screaming, "We don't need this. We have Napier."
and also check your publication dates for Oman, because he was writing this from 1903 to 1930, I believe.
Yeah.
It is more than a century old.
Which
Don't
actually
get me
means
wrong.
that you are updating, that there is more need for this than there was for Omen over Napier. It's been longer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I can understand there will be nervousness from certain quarters, and this isn't to disparage against people who are going and looking at individual campaigns, and they're doing great work in the process.
Mhm.
But actually, try and knit the whole thing together. Bring in much better Spanish material. Bring in the politics. Bring in the cultural side of things. Reynolds is chuckling away to himself here.
Yeah, I'm just debating whether to actually say it or pretend to cough Alexander Mikabridze's name.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
You need that multinational
Yeah.
dimension.
And this is the thing, right? That you do this properly, and I have faith that Zach will. Otherwise, Alex and Beatrice will both beat him to death.
Mhm.
To do this properly, you will incorporate all of those campaign and battle histories that have been written. Right? That's how you do this. It's not about they're all wrong and I'm right, or
Mhm.
I'm not talking about them. It's about when you write something like this, you pull in everything. That's the only way to do it. Otherwise, you go stark raving mad.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This isn't something that exists to try and sort of turn around and go, oh, everybody else has got it wrong. That's not really about this. This is about bringing all of those voices together in
Hmm.
one cohesive narrative.
Yeah.
That's what Omen was seeking to do, and
Hmm.
that's what this would aim to do.
Yeah.
God knows how I'm going to get somebody to agree to publish it, quite frankly. Never mind writing the damn thing,
I
because
think
we know what my
start with
French and Spanish.
writing it, then we'll figure it out.
Yeah,
Um,
indeed. So
but
that's
yeah, go ahead, Zach, please.
this is I'm permitted to speak on my own show. Awfully good of you. You knew when I said that I'd let you run this one that I was going to be a jerk at some point.
Oh my god. Yeah, no,
Um,
that's fair. That's fair.
but yeah, so this is one of the ways that you can come up with these ideas for books, and this isn't kind of um, a sense of, oh look, this is an easy money maker, because actually it's not, because it's not an easy task.
Yeah,
If you're
not at
going
all.
to consider 4 nations' perspectives on one conflict over a book that will need to have at least 4 volumes at the absolute minimum. And I think if you did it in 4 volumes, you'd be so light on the detail that you'd be way short of the mark. This is a
I would
job that,
argue 6 nations.
on the basis of...
So obviously the 4, right, are Portugal, Spain, France, and Britain.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, obviously there are, are there changes happening in Russia and Prussia and all of that? Yes. But in terms of if you are going to straight up do the peninsula, then you have to pay attention as well to the waters around the peninsula, which means, to a certain extent at least, folding in the United States in the War of 1812 and the North Africans.
Yes, completely agree on North Africa.
Yeah.
Entirely. Yeah, the War of 1812 does have significance when it kicks off.
Yeah.
So
So 5 to 6, but yeah. I think one of the things that Alex really showed and needs to be the way going forward is we cannot think of this as a purely European conflict.
Yeah.
And I will remind you that, I don't need to remind you, Zach, you know this, but I will remind our listeners that, one of Spain's points of identity is how damn close it is to North Africa. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the Mediterranean. There's Gibraltar right there. There's a whole lot of stuff that we need to touch on when it comes to North Africa.
And you've got follow-on conflicts across the Spanish and Portuguese colonies,
Someone needs to write a proper global history of the knock-on revolutions.
Are we giving that to Alex as his next project?
Oh God, he would do such an amazing job of it. Just you bring in the general sort of age of revolutions, bring in the sort of the fuse lighting catalyst of Portugal and Spain being run through the ringer, put the Monroe Doctrine in there as well, and just let it go. There's been some amazing stuff on the campaigns. There's been some amazing stuff on the mercenaries from Europe who fought in those. But as far as I'm aware, and if I am wrong on this, please correct me, somebody. I would love to read this. There is no overarching history of those conflicts, and I would dearly love to see that.
And it's past time as well.
Yeah, it really
this is the trouble. We've got so many ideas and not enough time to write all of these books. It is a challenge. So, those are sort of the big macro ideas that you can get for a project. But I guess we started talking about mission creep, and that's absolutely what happened with my current project. I'm talking about multi-volume series on the Peninsular War, but before that, I've got to not only get the Crime and Punishment book out, but also get the...
Didn't Dostoevsky beat you to it?
Probably.
I love the fact that 2 of your greatest projects are Crime and Punishment a la Dostoevsky and War and Peace a la Tolstoy.
I'm going to have to title the next big project Les Miserables.
You really are. Yeah. Or A Tale of Two Cities.
Yes. That probably works slightly better.
Yeah.
In some respects.
Yeah. But no, sorry, you were talking about Crime
and go like The Tenant of Wuthering Heights. I know I've fused 2 before the Bronte fans get on me. I know it's The Tenant of Wildfell Hall and Wuthering Heights as 2 things. I was deliberately fusing the 2. It was a joke.
What about you take your drone work and you write Jane Eyre, AIR?
Oh, well played. Well played. There we go. That's book number 27 that I need to write.
It's Jane Austen from the air. It's a visual aerial history of late Georgian, early Regency rural Britain.
Okay.
Jane Eyre.
Yeah, there we go. Impressed by that. And
honestly, guys, we joke about this, and I'll talk about mission creep and in my work as well in a second after Zach finishes his. But it is slightly horrifying and amazing and slightly amusing, and it's one of the reasons why we all value conferences so much. How much of our ideas are generated by talking to each other and joking with each other. And there's that moment of like you say something snarky, and then the person you're saying it to just stops and goes, "Actually, that's a fantastic idea."
This is the thing, because we all know that all of our ideas are mental.
Yeah.
Right. They're all stupidly ambitious. It doesn't matter what you're trying to do. Like, I'm not being funny. Trying to write a cultural history of the memory of the Battle of Waterloo. Like, if you put that in front of me, I'll be like, where do you even begin? Where do you start? Where do you stop? How
Yeah.
do you source it all? How do you sift it all? How do you work out what's representative? You just run away screaming from it.
Yeah.
It's what we attempt to do is an incredibly difficult task. And I think the more you become aware of the scale of what history actually involves when you do it properly, the more you can kind of get wary of ever starting, because you kind of don't know where you're going to stop.
Yeah.
Um, but
No, I
yeah,
agree with that.
you're dead right. My East India Company research basically came out of a question that a colleague of mine put to me, where he just turned around and said, "Okay, what's the sort of empire-wide perspective on all of this?" At which point you kind of go, "Oh shit, there's a question."
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
yes, so I've worked out what happens when white people put white people on trial, but what happens when you've got somebody who isn't white on trial?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What happens then?
Yep.
And that's where I've got my current
Yeah.
research from, and I'm very grateful to it, because I'm doing reasonably well out of the whole process.
Yeah. No,
Um,
absolutely.
even
And
if I am,
yeah,
e-
go ahead. No, go ahead, please, Zach. Finish your
even if
thought.
I am elbow deep in crime and punishment transcripts right now, another 800 nearly trials in the database. So I've
Ooh.
nearly made the full 10,000 for my
Oh my
grand
God.
database. Not
That's
quite there
awesome.
yet.
You'll get there. You'll absolutely get there.
I mean, if nothing else, we'll keep it under like the number of downloads for this podcast. I'm not that devoted to crime and punishment that I'm going to do
That's
like
fair.
400,000
Yeah.
trials. Even I have my limits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I experienced some of the same thing. Sort of the next big monograph that I plan to write is sort of cultural history of commemoration of the empire, and it's that same thing, and it came out of the same questions. And my point, it was my the people on my committee when I did my dissertation, and then every single anonymous peer reviewer on my book. What about the empire? What about the empire? What about the empire? And there's too much. It can't be a chapter. It has to be a book. But it's fundamentally like you know, talking about Waterloo in Britain and even in Ireland and even in progressive reform places, it's still all about sort of white people celebrating white people and a victory over white people. You take that and you put it into areas that are, in the case of Tasmania, at that point, fundamentally committing genocide. And you have a very, very, very different read. You have to. You have to. So, yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
there's a really important point that you picked up on there, that notion that, this just can't be a chapter.
yeah.
And I think there is sometimes a temptation
Hmm.
to just shoehorn it in. But if you do, you do a hack job.
Exactly.
And you miss an important context. And
Yeah.
the person who I often come back to on this, and it pains, I say this every time, and yet I criticize them regardless. But it does pain me to criticize Roger Norman Buckley, because the concept was good,
Hmm.
and in a theoretical sense, you would think he'd got the right materials. But when he wrote Britain's West India Army, he
Hmm.
missed a lot.
Yeah.
And so when he sat down, well, he missed a lot in relation to crime and punishment. Like, in terms of actually looking at the army in the West Indies, he was using some really decent material.
Yeah.
And you can understand why he gets to the conclusions he does based on what he uses. But when he looks at crime and punishment, he looks at the general court martials confirmed abroad.
Yeah.
Now, if you're sitting there with the National Archive catalogue in front of you on your lap, that's
Hmm.
exactly what you would do.
Yeah.
But then once you write about that and you start drawing these big macro conclusions off the basis of this register that you've looked at, and you're looking at how many trials is it? 2,506 trials in that catalog. And you think, okay, this is great. I've cracked it.
Yeah.
You haven't, because you're
No.
looking at one tier of court within a very specific context, i.e. abroad, as opposed to at home where you get a different picture. And that's where just trying to make it a chapter can actually lead to you undoing some really good work, because at some point somebody's going to turn around and go, there's bigger picture here, and you've missed something. And then you become the guy who created an interpretation that actually somebody turned around and made their name by taking apart. And you don't want to be that guy.
Zach White has entered the chat.
Indeed. Plunder, provost, and punishment intensifies.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an important point that you can take the easy option, do a chapter on it.
Yeah.
But actually, sometimes it just needs a lot more, and it needs far more careful thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm currently working on something that is the definition of it needs more than a chapter on it, but is nowhere near, to be very clear, and no offense meant to anyone who adores what I do, I'm included in that, is less racially and geopolitically important than Crime and Punishment Overseas. But that's my work on the 1824 Battle of Waterloo hippodrama and all that came after it. It's about 2-3 pages in my book, and going into detail is giving me not only an understanding of commemoration and all of that, it's giving me an understanding of promotion, not in the military sense, in the cultural and capitalist sense, promotion, adaptation, all of that, and it's also just so much damn fun to write.
Well, this is another point, isn't it? The cutting room floor can be quite key to what becomes an expert. You write however much you write, and then your editor turns around and says, nah, that needs to come out. And then you go, okay. And initially you think, well, I'll turn it into an article. And then you do your contextual reading to turn it into an article. And then you realize that actually there's a whole other, like just your contextual reading is like your opening chapter. And then there's sort of the stuff that you cut that could be chapter 1 and 2. And you very quickly realize that you get a different kind of mission creep, but it's sort of the stuff that's born from taxing material.
Yeah, and to give everyone an insight into this, just because I have the numbers right in front of me, because I have been working. I've actually, Zach, you'll appreciate this. I've had a very, very good couple of days. I've written 3,700 words in the past 4 days.
That's decent going.
It is very decent going, especially since I started that with, how do I do this again? Because I've been teaching for the semester or the term, and it just hasn't been there. This started out, potentially it could have been a chapter on, it could have been an article on this hippodrama. I'm not done yet. I am not done yet. This is purely the introduction. There's a bunch more. This introduction, and again, I'm not done. I'm near the end, but I'm not done, is 18,000 words.
Your editor just had a heart attack hearing that.
That's fair. That's very fair. So in fairness, the way it's coming, the way it's being shaped, and what's hopefully going to be is it's going to be a source book. It's going to be an annotated source book. So the introduction becomes all of the analytical argumentation. Hence why it is one thing. So just to give some people an insight, Zach, you're more familiar with this recently than I am. What are the preferred word counts for articles these days?
Usually 6,000 to 8,000.
Yeah. So that's 3 articles right there. That's not happening. But as sort of a source book, it is happening. And I think this is a good point, honestly, to talk very briefly, at least, about what could be argued as the dark side of this, which is, you're listening to 2 people that are passionate enough to spend several hours on a random Tuesday talking to each other about this. This is, to a certain extent, what we live and breathe. Zach a little bit more than I do, because I also have interests in fashion and things like that.
Hang on. There's a world outside of history?
There is, in fact, my friend.
I don't believe it. This is
Yeah,
witchcraft. You're making things up now.
I'll send you video of the of my new personal record that I pulled in a deadlift in a powerlifting competition 2 weeks ago, just to prove that there are things outside of history. Um, for anyone who's curious, by the way, it was 175 kilos. Um, yeah, which is, and again, this is one of the things I find utterly fascinating, because every interest has this, right? You know, we talk about what we write, we talk about what we research, and people who are who just read this for fun, or are amateur historians, are just like, what the hell are you talking about? 175 kilos is an enormous amount of weight for you or me. For the people who do this professionally, it's a warm-up weight. They're moving 2 to 3 times that, and they're smaller than me. So
That is
every
literally 2.5 times my body weight that
Yep.
you're lifting there.
Mm-hmm.
That's mental.
Yeah. And it felt good. I will say that. Anyway, what the hell was I talking about? Oh yes, the dark side of this. Um, you know, we are happy to do this. We're happy to talk about this. We're happy to do this because we love it. But also, we are in a profession that requires us to do this. And I think it's time to at least briefly acknowledge the whole publish or perish thing, right? One of the reasons that I'm doing this hippodrama work, in addition to being really into it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it come to fruition, I think it's going to be, I think people are going to be really interested in it, is it's a book credit that doesn't take a full monographs 2 to 3 to 4 years to do for my CV, for my job prospects. And that is the other side of this. And I think we need to at least acknowledge that.
Yeah, we do. I have made the point, I suspect in the past, certainly not recently, that people don't get rich out of this
No, they do not.
business of publishing. Everybody thinks, oh, you write a book and it must sell, 1,000 copies or something, and 2,000, however many thousand, and like, no. What people don't realize is that those who chase the Twitter figures are actually chasing 10,000.
Yeah.
Why are they chasing? What's the 1% rule? It's the notion that 1% of your following will engage with your work to the point where they will bother to dig into their pockets to go and buy your book.
Yep.
That therefore means when you present yourself to a publisher, you can say, look, I've got 10,000 Twitter followers, and your publisher will go, okay, that means we guarantee our first 100 copies.
Yep.
At which point they reckon they can break even, which therefore means they have more interest. That's the threshold for success. And so we have a situation where you're not going to get a popular history contract with a book on crime and punishment in the British Army during the Napoleonic Wars. Like, nobody cares. People don't really care that much when I do episodes on it, genuinely. Like, if you compare the metrics, I take a 10-15% hit in terms of listener stats when I do a crime and punishment episode. People aren't interested, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But it therefore means that when you turn around to a publisher and go, yeah, do you want to give me 15,000 to publish this book? Get lost. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, this is the thing, right? It's the oh yeah, you 10,000. The people who make their living writing books are publishing in the hundreds of thousands to the millions in sales. That's what they're aiming for, right? Everything we do is on the very small change end of this.
Like, I know somebody who got £400 for a contract with a publisher
in advance.
Well, I'm not sure if that's the advance or just what they're getting full stop. I know other publishing companies where they used to give you 1,000 up front, and then if your royalties ever exceeded 1,000, you'd get whatever surplus you made, but nobody ever got more than that. But that was like pre-pandemic that sort of thing was happening. The other issue is that a number of these publishers that have been going big on these titles, Napoleonic titles, people like Pen and Sword, Hellion, they are now scaling back because people think that the market is saturated. And you might look at the market and go, but there are a whole bunch of areas that haven't been covered. and yet people feel that the market is saturated, so
Yeah.
people aren't willing to invest in the same way. So yeah, there is this expectation that you publish for your supper, but not that you publish in order to make huge sums of money. It's that if you're in the academic market, you need to publish in order to prove that you are continuing to do your side job of researching.
Yeah.
And if you want to go for the promotions, you need to have a publication record. There is this
Hmm.
expectation that you continue to deliver. One of the big problems that I am acutely aware of is that I haven't published in quite a long time,
Yeah.
and I need to get that sorted. And
Hmm.
so, you make the time for that to
Yeah.
happen.
Absolutely. You do publish for your supper. It's just not in the direct published. Your supper is not purchased with the royalties of your book. Your supper is purchased with your salary as a teacher and a scholar. And to get those jobs and to keep those jobs and to get promoted in those jobs, you need to publish. That's how this works.
Yeah, there is an ongoing pressure, and of course, you're meant to do all of that whilst teaching full time in
Hmm.
a university with marking, dealing with admin, also doing additional public engagement activities.
Committees, ever committees.
Yep. The expectation that you organize conferences, there are many things that, and I know we're sort of sitting here playing the world's smallest violin. We do get to do
Do what
a
we do for a
fantastic
living.
job,
Yeah.
um, day to day, but it does also come with its challenges.
Yeah.
And yeah, we shouldn't just sit here and go, ain't it great that we get to talk about all of this fun stuff? There are
Exactly.
also pressures on it.
Exactly. So one of the things you mentioned there in sort of what we are expected to do outside of teach and research, and I think this is a really nice jump to our next point, is popular engagement in terms of organizing and going to conferences and things like that. So you have sort of a 1.5 to 2-fold pseudo conference report and conference plug for us, Zach.
I
So
do indeed.
why don't you kick that off, or touch the slow match to the port fire on that one?
Yeah, so I've just come back. Well, not like literally just come back, but at the weekend I was at a Waterloo Association study day, they call them. Um, the Waterloo Association are an organisation that was basically set up by the then Wellington, if memory serves, um, basically in order to preserve the battlefield itself. It was all tied up with this idea that they were going to build a motorway through it.
Mm,
And the then Wellington got in touch with the then Anglesey, as you do, and said, "I know what, I'll write a letter to the Times," and Julie did. And eventually, one of the things that was born out of this was the Waterloo Association. Not sure they spend so much time working on the battlefield preservation these days as other projects.
mm,
And one of the things that they do really well is they put together these study days that are always really well attended, and I think would be even bigger if they were available online, but logistics mean that they can't make that happen. Um, and so this one was on amphibious operations, and they had a pretty stellar lineup, it has to be said. So Gareth Glover was talking about operations in the West Indies. Carol Duvall was talking about Abercrombie and the invasion of Egypt,
mm.
1801. Jacqueline Reiter was talking about the Vulcan expedition, and Matthew Taylor was talking about his new book, Black Redcoats, The Corps of Colonial Marines, 1814 to 16. And I like the concept behind this. You just take a theme, get some speakers in, um, and see what they've got to say. And so each person does a full hour
Mm.
of talk and questions, hosted at the Rifles Museum in Winchester in their Kincaid Gallery, which is the home of that stunning diorama.
Yep.
So a lovely venue to host one of these things. And it was a really good day all round. The topic was good, speakers were decent. Um, Gareth, Carol, Jacqueline always bring a
Oh yeah.
very, very good game to these. And despite all of that, the standout um, talk, and the others won't mind me saying this because everybody was having
Mm.
conversations about it afterwards, agreeing that this was the case. The standout talk was unquestionably Matthew Taylor, who folks won't be familiar with because he's a new name on the block. But I tell you now, I might as well give up on any prospect of making a career in public history because this guy is going places. Like the rest of us,
In
we might as
fairness,
well
you
pack
once
up
said
and
that
go
about
home.
me. Uh,
We've all been handed our P45s, quite frankly, by this guy. Um, so Matt actually works in the House of Lords. He's not a sitting member of the House of Lords, in case people were wondering. He's not sort of Earl Taylor or anything.
Honestly, though, having seen this chap in photos, the image of him working in the House of Lords, even as a non-peer, is one of the best images I've had today.
It's beautiful, isn't it? He's like heavy metal guy meets Napoleonic history nerd.
Yeah, he's a punk he's a punk historian, and I don't mean a historian of punk.
No, it's but the thing that is so brilliant about Matthew's way of not just his work is brilliant
Mm,
and really interesting. Um, and I went there with every intention of buying the book anyway. Um, but it's the way in which he delivers it because we're all very passionate about our avenues of research and we can talk about it for hours. But Matthew very visibly got this at a human emotional level. He hasn't forgotten the humanity behind this history. And the story of the Corps of Colonial Marines is that it is basically a unit formed from escaped slaves
hmm
in North America
Yeah,
during the War of 1812. And the British rock up to the, as Matthew would say, to the Chesapeake Bay and send out these messages to the plantations going, if you run away and come and find us, we'll give you freedom. We need some service in return for it. Of course, whole layers of hypocrisy going on of, we'll recruit you if you run away and we'll give you your freedom, but we won't give the slaves that we've actually got back in our colonies freedom. And he's very frank about that, which is refreshing to see. You know, he doesn't go for a.
hmm
He treads a very delicate balance. You know, in terms of look, what the British are doing here is impressive, but they're also massive bloody hypocrites. Can we please
yeah,
acknowledge? And that's a very delicate line to tread.
hmm
It'd be very easy to go either side of this and scream a Rule Britannia narrative, or to um, kind of solely focus on the hypocrisy side of
yeah,
things. You could very easily do either and produce
hmm
a, a work of some merit. But he gets this at like the personal human level and is visibly moved when he's telling these stories. So one of the things that this group does is that they organize raids to plantations, um, but not just, hey, let's go and find some more people to recruit. If you got from your plantation to a British ship and told them, this is where the plantation is, my family are still on that plantation, what the British, with the Corps of Colonial Marines, would do is organize a raid to
yeah,
get their family out, which is just fantastic. But he's visibly moved as he's explaining these stories and talking about the quotes that we have directly from some of these
hmm
guys about how their ex-masters might turn up and go, um, oi, can I have my, to the British it is, oi, can I have my slaves back? And then the British sort of turn around and go, well, we don't have any slaves on board this ship because
yeah,
these guys are all free men. So you can come on board and have a conversation with him if you want and try and persuade him to go back.
yeah,
And he's relating these kind of back and forths between
yeah,
former slave and former owner. And I've very rarely seen somebody just get it so personally. And
hmm
historians are very often guilty of becoming so used to this material that we'd leave some of that passion behind and we'd leave some of that personal um, emotion, I guess,
yeah,
on the floor. Because part of what we're trained to do is to be dispassionate in how we assess this material, right?
yeah,
We kind of have to weed the emotion out of the historical process so that the emotion doesn't cloud our judgment.
hmm
Now, that therefore means that when we present this, there's that. echo of that in the way in which we often present this stuff. You wouldn't think this guy was talking about his first book from the way in which he talks about it. He's going places. The
Mm.
rest of us who want to make it as public historians are screwed. It ain't going to happen. He deserves every contract for a TV documentary or a, I don't know, Amazon Prime series based around this that comes his way, because it's an amazing story that he's telling.
It is it's worth noting, it is the largest military emancipation pre-Civil War,
Yeah,
the British campaign in the Chesapeake.
I think that's a line that he uses.
Yeah.
So people, firstly, go and buy the book, Black Redcoats, The Corps of Colonial Marines, 1814 to 16 by Matthew Taylor, available at Pen and Sword. I think they're going to make an absolute fortune out this book. I think it's going to sell very well.
We can only hope.
Well, it needs to, quite frankly. I have persuaded Matthew to not only do an episode for the show, but we're having conversations about a potential War of 1812 mini-series. So we'll see how that one develops. But then we've also got your our mini-series on presidents and prime ministers incoming at some point, and the Kate Jameson series on naval history. And we've got this mini-series. So between all the mini-series, we've probably got enough content to just pack the podcast between now and the end of time.
It sounds like your Patreon subscribers are getting a decent bargain.
It sounds like they need to, like, the people who don't subscribe to Patreon, like, should, so that I can go and pay all of these people.
Zach, what do the people who subscribe to Patreon, who support you on Patreon, get that the people who don't?
Well, for a start, they get it ad-free, which folks might have noticed that I've changed the way in which the system works. So now if you listen into the show, you get some ads. Now, if you don't like the ads, you can just skip them, but it means that I get paid basically for people to stick their ads on the show, which means that I can pay people like Luke to appear on said show.
It was there is something truly brilliant though about having you interrupted by Ryan Reynolds.
I mean, I'll take it. Getting paid to be interrupted by Ryan Reynolds as well. You know, that's acceptable.
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
many levels. So ad-free access, early access as well. You'll also get exclusive material, stuff that doesn't necessarily make it out to main inverted commas air. So a lot of the sort of behind the scenes stuff, particularly from the documentaries, you know, me having an aneurysm in an aircraft that flies over and ruins a particular take, that was particularly popular, I must say.
There'll probably be some behind the scenes stuff from this very episode.
Oh yeah, probably. The amount of nonsense, and this is the thing. There was a whole load of nonsense before we started recording.
Yeah.
Never mind when we actually got on with it. And then there's the traditional inverted commas perks. So shout outs for Mentioned in Dispatches patrons and the Admiral patrons, and then the Admiral patrons also get monthly meetups with me. They don't get monthly meetups with you yet. Perhaps that'll be something that we'll arrange.
There you go.
Or maybe not. Maybe you don't fancy the idea, but we shall see.
No, I'm up for it.
If there is public demand and acclamation, if people don't want to meet with me, and to be honest, I don't want to meet with me, so I can sympathise with that. Then we'll get Luke on board. So yeah, that was the Waterloo Association Study Day. It was bloody brilliant. And much though I am always urging people to go and join the Napoleonic and Revolutionary War Graves charity, you should also go and join the Waterloo Association.
Here.
Because they're a worthwhile organisation.
Yeah, no, they are.
And if you're in the UK particularly, you get a lot in terms of access to these events that are cheaper for members.
Yeah.
So bear all of that in mind. So that's that one. The other thing that I've been doing recently is sulking, which isn't unheard of from me.
I was going to say that's not new. That's
Yeah,
why is that newsworthy?
Well, indeed. But there's a particular point to my sulking this time. There's always a point to my sulking. What am I saying?
No. It's on audio. Sometimes you sulk pointlessly. Exhibit A, my lad.
Indeed, the defense rests.
On its laurels.
You're familiar with how I operate then.
Oh.
Yeah, so folks will be familiar that I've mentioned it once already. We, Luke and I and others run the Napoleonic and Revolutionary War Graves charity, and we have a big conference coming up.
We do
War
indeed.
and Peace in the Age of Napoleon III. We've had to be careful with where we put the 3 on this one, because if we called it War and Peace 3 in the Age of Napoleon conference, that would be grammatically nonsense. And if we called it War and Peace in the Age of Napoleon III conference, then people would think we were talking about Napoleon III, which would then lead to people from the wrong period coming and having a chat with us about how they want to appear at our conference. So it's a bit clunky. It's the third one in the series, if you hadn't worked it out already. The previous installments being 2019 and 2022. At the last one, we lost the Queen, like hours
In the middle of it.
Well, yeah. Actually, we'd just started the AGM, hadn't we?
Yeah, we had.
And then news broke that Her Majesty had passed away, and then we lost the venue because we were at the National Army Museum, which was promptly requisitioned by the Ministry of Defence because they own it, and they wanted to use it for preparations for, I believe it was London Bridge, wasn't it?
Yes, it was Operation London Bridge.
Uh, so we got told, no, you can't have this venue anymore. I know that you've got all of these people who've come thousands of miles to attend this conference, but you literally, it's like getting turfed out of. It's nothing like getting turfed out of your home.
No.
But
in fairness to the National Army Museum, after some negotiation, they did let us stay there for putting everything online.
mm-hmm.
So the public could not attend, but they did let us. They didn't leave us in the lurch. We did in fact negotiate.
They were good to us.
Yeah, they were.
But there was a solid night of zero sleep as we took an in-person conference and hurled it online at, I mean, genuinely, it was like 6 o'clock, I think, by the time we got the news, just before or just after. Well, because the news broke, and then of course the implications had to filter down. So it was a long time before the
no, I remember watching the AGM. I was actually in London. I flew over for it, but I caught COVID. So I was there in London in a hotel room attending virtually. And I remember watching the start of the AGM and someone calling from off camera,
That
Zach,
was
Liam, they've just announced the Queen passed away.
And then so it was probably about 6:30, 7 o'clock by the time we got told. Yeah, you think you're coming back here at 9 o'clock tomorrow. You're not. So that was the first two. I mean, the first one went off pretty smoothly. Apart from a lift not working, there were only 2 lifts in the building, and we were spread across 3 floors, and one of the lifts broke. Not with people inside it or anything, but that was like a challenge. And people complained that they didn't have long enough to get their coffee, and why hadn't I paid somebody to pour their coffee for them? So that was
now you have students that can pay that can pour their coffee for them.
Yeah, but I don't believe in menial labor.
Okay.
Irrespective of the evidence that you may have seen on this podcast, of course.
No comment.
But see, my plan had been to open War and Peace 3 with kind of some light-hearted comment about how the king was in excellent health, so we didn't need to worry this time. But of course, that proved to not be the case. So we have checked what the legal position is if we lose a second monarch in 3 conferences. We remain confident that if we do lose a monarch, I will be sent to the Tower of London and prosecuted for treason, because there will clearly be a link there. But I'd started this by talking about sulking, and the reason that I'm sulking is that we have had our cool. I know what rabbit holes diverging. What? Can you tell I'm neurodivergent much? So we've had the call for papers, and it was a record breaker It was
Mm.
a record-breaking call for papers, the most applications we have ever had. And we took almost all of them as well. So there will be 54 talks in the sort of 20-minute form, plus 3 keynotes. Those keynotes will be Professor Ed Koss, Dr. Jacqueline Reiter, and Professor Alan Forrest, who will be talking on topics TBC. We'll get details out in due course. 2.5-day event starting on the afternoon of the 5th of September and ending in the evening of the 7th, held at York St John University, who are very generously helping us to co-run this.
And have the advantage of not being owned by the British Army.
There is that. We have checked what happens if the king does pass away mid-conference. We think we're okay. Not for like me being tried in the tower. That's a whole other thing. Are you rolling your eyes at me being melodramatic? Are you for real here?
No,
You
not at
rolling your
all.
eyes at me
I
being
wouldn't. I
melodramatic?
wouldn't dream of it.
Of course not. Of course not.
Wouldn't dream of it.
As he rearranges his cravat. But the point of where I'm trying to go with this waffle, like,
yeah, I'm
some
stuck
minutes
on this.
in.
Right, we've got a great venue that is supporting us to the hilt. We've got a superb program committee, and we've got a record-breaking number of applications or papers turning into a record-breaking conference. Where's the sulking, Zach?
Because you've got to organize all of this. And I have a brilliant conference committee, don't get me wrong. Sam Jolly and Graham Callister are doing wonderful work. But have you tried arranging all of the panels in a conference? Because you've got these 54 proposals, right, that you take forward. And then you've got to group them in groups of 3 into panels that make some kind of sense and have an overarching theme. And you will it is a fact of this universe.
It is a truth universally acknowledged.
It is indeed that you can group any 2 papers together, but finding a third to complete that panel is an actual impossibility unless you do some kind of intellectual gymnastics that give you indigestion afterwards. It's just the way of the world. So that's where the first wine comes from.
Okay.
The second wine is that you then think, okay, great, I've got all of these panels finally sorted out after 3 hours of committee meetings about how, literally 3 hours of committee meetings about how are these all going to slot together. And then you think, okay, fine, just drop them all in, and you've got your conference program nice and easy, except that some people aren't available for like anything other than a particular afternoon on a particular day. And then somebody else on that panel isn't available on the one day that somebody else is available. So your beautifully arranged set of conference proceedings suddenly goes up in a puff of smoke.
Yeah.
And you find yourself trying to juggle and sending about 5,000 emails, 5,000 being an actual number, zero exaggeration required here. 50,000 emails get sent trying to marshal these 54 speakers. And after you sent those 500,000 emails, and you've got 5 million responses.
No. I am sorry. I'm going to have to draw the line there. I will let you run the joke about exaggerating this number perfectly, and that makes sense. But in no academic world, under any sun, in any multiverse, do you get more replies than the emails you sent in organizing an academic conference?
I have been rumbled. Guilty as charged, Your Honor. Yeah, that is entirely true. Because this is the other challenge, right? Some people go, you present them, and this is what's about to happen. We've got a draft program together, and I'm not happy, partly because, and this is where the real sulking starts. Like, we've only got into initial stage sulking and mild petulance so far.
What?
Then you get to
we are losing subscribers by the minute.
No, we're already there. We're already there. The big one is that as the organizer, you have organizer's privilege to arrange these panels so that you can attend the ones that you really want to attend, right? And that's one of the few perks of organizing conferences. You lose sleep, you lose hair, you turn grey, you lose your sanity, but you do at least get to go and see the papers that you want to see. The trouble is, you want to go and see more papers than is physically possible within the confines of your conference.
Mm.
So you end up putting these all into slots and then going, well, what have I done that for? I've got that clashing with, I wanted to go and see both of those. And then you realize, well, actually, there isn't a single session because panels run simultaneously.
Yeah,
So
of
you
course they
usually
have
have
to.
2 or 3. Otherwise, you'd have a conference going on for like 5 weeks. And the net result of that is that you basically look at this entire program and go, well, this is useless. I'm not going to get to see half of what I want to see. And then, of course, you send that off to the people, and then the people who didn't respond to your initial request of like, are there any days that you can't do? They then turn around and go, well, I don't like presenting on this particular day. Can I have that day instead? At which point my brain implodes. I have a nervous breakdown, an aneurysm, a coronary, and get triple pneumonia.
Mm. Famously a stress-related condition.
Indeed.
All right. Well, all of that whinging aside,
How long have I whinged for?
it's got to be about 10 minutes, 15 minutes at this point. I didn't note the countdown clock at the start, unfortunately. Why don't you, without naming names, give us 5 papers that you are particularly looking forward to?
Why am I only allowed 5? See, I told you I'd be petulant and whiny
All
about all
right.
of this.
Okay.
And why can't I name names as well?
Okay, that's fair. I just meant if you, because then everyone who was invited who isn't on that list is going to get irritated, but they're going to do that anyway.
Well, yeah, it's me. They're irritated before they
That's
even
fair.
start
All
emailing
right,
me.
5 panels that you're excited for.
Oh, bloody hell. There's a really interesting one on alternative approaches to studying wars. That's going to feature papers on how living historians, because they have experience of hefting a musket
Yeah.
and eating rations and marching and all the rest of it, could actually contribute something useful to the discussion that academics try to have,
Mm-hmm.
and interesting interplays there. We've also got a piece within there about myth busting, Napoleonic historiography, not my paper. In case people think that I've plugged my own talk, I haven't. And another one on wargaming and simulation. So different
Okay.
approaches to all of that. That's going to be a cracker.
I
Um,
think I can guess who is delivering 2 of those papers.
mhm, mhm. We've got one on female influences in war, and I know
Excellent.
that every time I mention women's history on this podcast, my listenership drops by 20%. I don't care. I will continue to do it to the bitter end. But we've got
Hang on. At the risk of being attacked by your listenership, if you are someone who, the minute he mentions female experience, that half the population that was half the population during the Napoleonic Wars, if you're the sort of person who, the minute that gets mentioned, decides that they're going to stop listening or remove their Patreon money, take a long, hard look at yourself, because first of all, it's no longer the 1960s. And second of all, what on God's green earth is wrong with you?
but it happens time and time again.
Dear
The
Lord.
the download stats don't lie, right?
Yeah,
And
no, I know.
if you put women in the title of an episode, you can guarantee there is a 20% drop in engagement. It's just a fact. There's nothing I can do about it. I've tried the jokey approach. I've tried the ram it down your throat approach. Nothing works. There's just less engagement. It is all you can do is continue to produce the material, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And hope for the best. But I'm liking that I've now managed to make you ranty and angry. Clearly, this kind of this internship that you're engaging in, this apprenticeship in podcasting, is ruining you, Reynolds. Quite frankly, it is ruining you.
Yeah, apprenticeship implies that I'm under the tutelage of a master. When do I get to meet him?
Oh, very good, very very pithy. Well done, well done. Nobody saw that one coming. So yeah, we've got some great papers within that panel. One on Josephine de Beauharnais and some allegations of corruption. Actually,
Hmm.
we've got the story of Frances Watson, who was one of the women who was at Waterloo, and yes, I do actually mean at Waterloo.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've also got women's experiences in the Flanders campaign of 1793 to 95.
Oh,
So that's
spectacular.
going to be cracking.
Yeah.
We've got a whole Peninsular War panel, 2 papers looking at Siege of San Sebastian, and then another contextualizing British military effectiveness in the conflict. I'm chairing that one because, conference organizers' privilege. I went, right, I'm having that. Nobody
What's
can take it off me.
Given that you've read the abstracts of both of these, what's the likelihood the two historians of San Sebastian are going to end up in a fist fight?
No, they're working in collaboration with one
Oh,
another.
shit. Okay.
I know.
Coalition warfare. Who knew?
Indeed. Then there's a panel that features some bloke called Luke Reynolds, so I'm not sure if it's going to be any good. But this Luke Reynolds character is doing something called Playing Heroes in the 19th Century, the juvenile theatrics of the Battle of Waterloo. So I suppose I might turn up and listen to that one.
To be clear, I do not mean that the people who fought the Battle of Waterloo were behaving in a juvenile manner. It is about toy theater.
No, but the people who've written about it since have acted in a juvenile manner.
Some of them certainly have. Yeah, that's fair, including me.
And me.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I wouldn't bother if I were you. I hear he's a dandy and a twit.
There's nothing wrong with being a dandy.
No, nothing at all wrong with being a dandy.
Twit, on the other hand. But we've also got a piece in there, Staging War and Peace, Foreign Theatre Companies in Occupied France between 1815 and 1818.
Oh, fun.
And Remembering the Napoleonic Caribbean, contested legacies and soil traces in the memorials of Ralph Abercrombie, John Moore, and Thomas Picton. So that's going to be a lively paper.
That's going to be good.
Yeah, we've called that one Memory and Framing Napoleonic Narratives.
Love it.
There are tons of other brilliant ones in there. There's one on statehood, security, and leadership.
I bet I know someone who's involved in that.
Yeah, can you possibly guess? Another on records of service based on a lot of data kind of analysis that's come out of recent times. I'm not on that one. So many good ones. Operational Art of War, Networks of Knowledge. We've got papers on gunpowder, the birth of chemistry,
okay,
disease, medicine. Some imbecile by the name of Zach White is talking about Agency of Empire, East India Company sepoys, and pragmatic methods of command and control. That sounds like one to miss, but they've been really crafty and they've put themselves on at the same time as Matthew Taylor, talking about Black Redcoats, and Josh Proven, talking about British contact and exploration in the Horn of Africa. So they've probably managed to hide their crappy paper by getting 2 stellar standout stars to present alongside them. So
haven't you also got one of the stars of the conference chairing that panel?
I mean, it's somebody called Luke Reynolds. I wouldn't call them a star.
I mean, valid.
Conference,
Very fair.
You just lined these up for me. I'm sorry, but
that's the point.
Easy to resist.
That is very much the point. I mean, in fairness, I was joking at that point, but I am looking. I'm glad you invited me.
In residence. So scholar in residence.
Let's not do this one again. But no, I'm now. I mean, I was happy to be chairing that panel anyway. Now that you've told me everyone's on it, I'm delighted. That sounds like a lot of fun. That's going to be a good one.
Yeah, it's going to be good. And it's not the only conference that's in the planning right now. Excuse me. The Wellington Congress is coming to Southampton in 2025. So they're clearly aiming for the 2/10th of Waterloo. And the call for papers is out. Deadline is the 31st of May. I haven't submitted my paper yet.
I haven't submitted mine either.
Okay, that's good to know it's not just me then.
I've been too busy actually writing.
But as you can imagine, Wellington and India will feature heavily in whatever I propose.
Yeah, I'm toying with stage depictions of Wellington.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
There you go. So a date for the diary. It's usually April 20.
Yeah, usually.
So it'll be April 2025 for that one. Search for the relevant Twitter account, Hartley Special Collections, for more details.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there we have it.
Yeah, keep your eye out. It should be probably sometime over the summer as well, and we'll highlight it. But we should be getting the call for papers for the next consortium on the Revolutionary Era, which is always worth your time. It is a spectacular conference. Yeah, very much worth it. I'm trying to think if there's any others. Honestly, I think those three are going to be the standouts of this academic year: War and Peace 3, Consortium of the Revolutionary Era, and the Wellington Congress.
I don't want to overstate it, but I suspect those are the three big Napoleonic gatherings that are going to happen this year.
No, I agree.
That's my belief. Because the Wellington Congress is usually a 2-day affair as well, if not 2.5-day affair.
Yeah.
So you can expect similar kinds of sizes for that in terms of number of speakers. So you'll have about 60 people at each. Yeah, it's going to be good.
Is there? So I know
massive.
CRE. Yeah, CRE is massive and well worth attending. I know CRE doesn't really do an online presence anymore. I have no idea about the Wellington Congress. Are we having any form of online stuff for War and Peace 3?
We are. So one of the 3 rooms will be live streamed at all times.
Spectacular.
The other 2 rooms won't be, just because I need something to preserve my sanity, and I need to not be jumping constantly from room to room trying to fix broken live streams like I did at War and Peace 2. To be fair, we had this plan for War and Peace 2. We were going to live stream one room and then had to live stream everything because that was the only way to make it work. So yeah, there will be the ability to attend online. Online ticket prices will be substantially cheaper because you won't have to pay for your food, and basically the way in which the ticket pricing works for in-person events is that we have to consider things like venue hire, overheads, transport costs for keynote speakers. We've also put in bursaries for those who would struggle financially to attend in person. So we need to recoup that cost. But there's also an incentivization to become a member of the charity, whereby the ticket pricing per day is still TBC, but whatever that day rate ends up being, that will be the day rate for members of the charity and for speakers. If you're not a speaker, you will find that the day rate is probably about £25 more. So basically, if you're planning to attend 2 days of this conference, you will recoup the cost of your membership fee with interest. So basically just become a member of the charity and save yourself the money. And then we get to put that money directly into restoring graves and all the rest of it, which is a rant for another day.
Yes. So all in all, it is going to be a spectacular time, and we look forward to seeing all of you in September in York St. John or online.
While we're there, won't we?
We will indeed.
Yeah, you won't be able to escape us. So come along, come and say hello.
Maybe we should do a series of walk and talks at the conference where we just beard scholars and they have the length of a hallway to talk about something.
That is very much the plan.
Yeah.
Collar people and go, you are appearing on this podcast, aren't you? And hope that they'll be too polite to say, no, we've heard about the quality of this show and we don't want anything to do with it.
There are advantages to the fact that no one listens to us, Zach.
Indeed.
All right. So that is all of the conference stuff happening, which is very exciting. I'm desperately looking forward to a lot of that.
You've been doing some reading, though, haven't you?
I have been doing some reading. I mean, yes. Who do we got here? We have the history of English toy theater, but that's obviously not what we're going to be talking about. But yeah, so I don't know if anyone of you have noticed, but there are two by the definition of historians, 2 recent Richard Sharp books.
See, I did mock you when you told me that because you turned around to me and said, "Oh, I'm reading the new Sharp," and I was like, "Oh, is that Command?" And you went, "No, it's Assassin." At which point I went, "Well, that's not the new one, is it, you fool?" So you can tell that I'm just as peevish and mean off air as I am on air. It's
Yeah,
not an
can
act.
confirm. Can confirm.
But yes, so you've been finally catching up. Well, I see. I'm being an arse here and going, "Oh, you're finally catching up," but I'm only a third of the way through Command myself, so I haven't actually caught up properly either. So hypocrite alert.
Hmm.
But yes, Assassin. We'll start with Assassin. What do you make of it?
So to be clear, right? Both Zach and I credit to at least a certain extent this series with getting into this period, as do most people that we talk to. This has done this along with Aubrey and Maturin and Hornblower have done an enormous amount for our field. I don't know if it's that I'm older or what's going on, but Assassin felt short to me. Right as it got to sort of the interesting stuff in Paris, it wrapped up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe that's because my entire career is built on the aftermath of Waterloo.
I mean, this is the thing, right? That you
Yeah,
should love this one because it's all about aftermaths.
yeah.
But it's very immediate aftermath. I think the jury. I don't want to be too mean about this because, firstly, don't be an asshole.
Yeah.
And secondly, not only do these books have a very fond place in a lot of people's hearts, but they also have a fond place, in a manner of speaking, in my heart, in
Mm-hmm.
that, root into the period. And I maintain that Sharps Trafalgar is a good book, and not rubbish, unlike everybody else who says that I'm an imbecile for believing that.
I need to reread that one to be able to properly comment on your opinion on it.
See, I would happily acknowledge that Sharps Trafalgar is saved by the last 100 pages, because the last 100 pages
Is
is
Trafalgar?
is Trafalgar,
Yeah.
right? And so there's no competing with that. And if you're reading that and then going around HMS Victory, you will become a Napoleonic nerd. It is a proven fact.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. That is
Um,
completely fair. I did want to bring up one thing. And it's honestly, and because of course it is. First of all, one thing I adored about Sharp's Assassin is all of the discussion of sort of the street stuff going on, right? The monkey show, which is exactly right. And I think he really nails that sort of uncertainty of, we don't know what's happening with this war. Life is going to continue, because that is exactly what happens, right? No one is waiting inside going, what's going to happen? And I adored all the stuff about like the plaster elephant and the plaster Arc de Triomphe. All of that is pure gold. It's spectacular. But I do want to address two things that happen in the historical note at the end. Now, Cornwell's historical notes are, I'm glad he has them in there. There are books that I have been introduced to by those historical notes. The First Respectable Spy being the great example of that, sort of the exploring officers. But there are 2 points in the historical notes of Sharp's Assassin that I do want to point out. Number one, I don't know if it's a personal slight. I don't know if the House of Orange ruined his life or ruined something. But Bernard Cornwell seems to have a personal vendetta against the Prince of Orange. Now, was Slender Billy, did he make some unfortunate choices in the Waterloo campaign? Yes, because he was, barely out of teenagerdom. He was given way too much responsibility for what age he was and his education, because he had royal blood, and that's how the way the world worked back then. But Sharp's Waterloo basically paints him as a accidentally mass murdering asshole.
yes. See, there are kernels of truth within what he says. So yes, at Capture Bra, he had just ordered a unit to deploy into line, and then it gets just walked over, frankly, by French cavalry.
Yeah.
The whole situation with Ompteda is disgusting,
Yes.
and every single one of those guys from Optader's unit who died, the blood is on Orange's hands because Optader not quite had a stand-up argument with Orange about this is suicide. I'll happily go forward, but I'm not going forward in line. And Orange turned around and said, well, if you won't follow my orders, I'll find somebody who will. At which point Optader goes, well, clearly I've got to lead this forward in person. Otherwise, there's going to be accusations of cowardice. And everybody gets absolutely ripped to pieces, exactly as Optader predicted.
Exactly.
All of that is entirely valid. But equally, everything that Luke says is also valid. He just shouldn't have been in that position of authority, and it's not entirely his fault.
Yeah. And my problem with the historical note of Sharp's assassin is it takes something that is entirely not his fault and lays the blame at him. The historical note of Sharp's assassin, and maybe there's been a Kindle update and it's been changed, but in the version that I read, the historical note of Sharp's assassin states that it was Slender Billy, the Prince of Orange, who had the Waterloo Mound built. It was not. It was his father. It was his father who was trying to commemorate his wound and basically turn Orange into a national hero for both Belgium and the Netherlands to try and keep his dual-partite monarchy alive. And he was the one who stripped down the Allied Ridge and built the mound. That is not the Prince of Orange's fault. I'm sorry. That is not. Also, I will say, I know respecting the Prince of Orange is not fashionable, but his actions in the Belgian Revolution, where he pushed for the acknowledgement of the revolutionaries, he pushed for a ceasefire and for basically listening to them, and then his own Dutch reforms, which admittedly were partially driven by do this or we'll kick you off the throne, earn him a little bit of fairness in my book. And so I will stand here and I will say, yes, he was an absolute shit to Optader. That all that blood is on his hands, but he was not enough of an asshole to self-grandiosely build a giant mound in his own name. That was his father using his wound to try and benefit him politically. So I just want to go on the record as saying that. And I also want to say the historical note also states that it was Wellington who had the Waterloo medal struck. And while it wouldn't have
going to irritate you.
Yes. And while I will freely admit that it wouldn't have happened without his approval, he did not strike that medal. All right. Rant over.
Are you feeling better now?
I am. Also, I want to know why exactly in Command Cornwall is so obsessed with tap loading suddenly. But that's probably a conversation to have with Liam or some other reenactor. But I did notice it constantly being mentioned.
See, the thing with Bernard Cornwell is that...
You're on first name terms with him, are you? The thing about Bernard is...
He does follow me on Facebook, actually. He wished me a happy birthday once. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
It's, I'm just dropping all of these names out here.
Shit, man. Hang on, I can do this too. Wait a second. I remember Simon Sharma once telling me. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
That's quite all right. Let me just pick Sean Bean up off the floor. Not literally. Yeah. What were we talking about? The thing with Bernard Cornwell is that he himself acknowledges sometimes he gets things wrong, and you're meant to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
What I find curious is things like tap loading. We've talked about this a lot over the years and how not good.
Yeah.
Like not going to work. Just so many levels of bad.
Yeah.
If he wants to stick it in, then it's his book, right? I wonder to what extent does he become imprisoned in sort of sharp law, if you know what I mean.
Although I will notice that at some points, like he's broken from that too. There's an entire plot point in Command about how Harper is going to run out of bullets for his 7-barreled gun because there's this weird size. Whereas for the majority of that series, he's repeatedly noted that the Nock gun takes standard pistol bullets.
Yeah, that's a good
That
point.
might be a historian actually correcting him. I don't know enough about the Nock gun to say definitively which caliber it was, but I know that did sort of jar with me a little bit.
Yeah, no, I don't know off the top of my head. What I will say about Command is that it got hammered by a lot of people when it came out, and being a third of the way in, I would say it's basically everything that I expected
Mm-hmm.
from a Sharp novel, and I
Yeah.
haven't gone back and revisited them in a heck of a long time, but I didn't. Assassin felt different
Yeah.
somehow. Command sort of didn't. Command felt a bit more like the older style, and I suppose I should sort of go and have a read and see if I'm just misremembering. But I
I'm pretty.
haven't
Go
I
ahead.
haven't had a big issue with it.
No, it was fine.
So I'm not
It
quite
was
sure. I mean,
aggressively fine.
somebody sort of turned around to me and said, "Oh, it feels like it's been written by AI." And I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, it's no, it seems like a fairly sort of standard what you'd expect from a Sharp novel.
Yeah, and I think
And
there's
there is
actually
another
less
one in the
misogyny
pipeline.
than there used to be. I
Yes,
think he's actually gotten better on that.
yes, he has.
Yeah.
I think he has to. In order
Yeah.
to get published, people have queried him about it, and he said, "Well, they're a product of the time that they were written."
Which is a valid point to a certain extent, but if you're going to continue that, then you make better, and he's doing that.
Yeah,
I will say I was genuinely worried for the first third of Command that it was going to be deeply unfair to the partisans, and it's not.
no,
Long story
no, it's
short,
not.
it's not. He has one asshole villain in there, but I think he's allowed one given the number of god awful British officers he's written over the years.
Yes, um, he's had some fairly prickish Brits.
Yeah.
There's a lazy stereotype um, going on there either, because the thing to bear in mind, of course, is that he marries Sharp to a female partisan
Yes,
leader.
he does.
So there is instantly a kind of a balance going on there that means he's
Mm-hmm.
not entirely caricaturing.
Yeah.
He is tapping into, don't get me wrong, he is tapping into a form of caricature of what
Mm-hmm.
um, certain Spanish partisan presence might have looked like, but he also redresses that balance with Teresa.
Yeah.
So that I didn't buy this whole AI thing. I'm sorry, but
No.
I thought it so far
I
I
will
haven't
I
got
will tell
anything
you
against it.
something. There is a scene at the end of that book that completely scuppers any idea of AI. And that is sort of the final bit. I won't spoil it for you, but it's the final bit involving Lieutenant Love, Cupid, the artillery officer.
Okay,
And I'm pretty sure Cornwall was just like, you know what? I just want to have fun with this for a little bit. And it's delightfully deranged.
okay, I'll look forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I say, I haven't finished it yet, but I've gone through a phase recently actually of books where I've started them and just gone, this is trash. I can't be
Mm-hmm.
bothered to finish this, which was once unheard of. I
Yeah.
used to be one of these people who would read to the bitter end of a book. Now
I think that's the
I've decided
neurodivergence.
well, yeah, but I think I've reached a point where I'm just like, you know what, I'm not going to waste my life on this any longer.
Yeah,
So a
that's fair.
different facet of neurodivergence has won out.
Life is too
Efficiency
short.
trumps everything,
Yeah.
indeed. But I haven't had
But
that
this
with Sharp's Command.
no, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. But this conversation did prompt a thought that I've been wanting to talk to you for a while about, and it's a fun one because we always, yes, we credit Sharp for a great deal, and he is responsible for a great deal in this stuff. But I have a question. I want your best slash favorite fiction, and it doesn't have to just be one; it can be a couple, set in this period that's not Sharp, Hornblower, or Aubrey Maturin.
See, there are instantly three contenders here. Um, One is most famously perhaps Simon Scarrow,
Mm-hmm.
with his series. Um, Another is Ben Kane's novel on 1812, which I personally really enjoyed,
Mm.
and became really invested. Now, I know I've mentioned this on the podcast in the past because I had him on to talk about it. I was very fortunate to see an early version of the manuscript,
Mm.
and didn't get the full manuscript. So he hadn't written the last chapter, which therefore meant that I didn't know how it ended, and it just stopped at a really crucial cliffhanger. And he could have actually just ended the book there,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and people would have wanted the sequel. They'd have been clamoring for it. Now, if you can get me that invested in a book and in the characters as well, I think that says something about your ability as a storyteller. That said, I also know some people haven't kind of got on with it particularly well. But personally, I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
Um, so I suppose perhaps it's a question of taste. I also know he was very careful with the history of it. He got Alex Mikaberidze on
Yeah.
board as an advisor. So, he's done his prep with
Yeah.
that. Um, so there's that. And there's also Lynn Bryant's series.
Mm.
Um, the Manxman series, and then also the Van Damme series.
Mm-hmm.
I think that last is probably going to win out for me.
Okay.
Just kind of the emotion of it. Lynn is. Uh, does she write under Lynn Dawson or Lynn Bryant? I
I
keep
think it's Lynn
forgetting.
Bryant. I believe it's Lynn
Okay.
Bryant.
Um, but she's on Twitter as Lynn Dawson, I believe, which is probably where the confusion's come from. Um, but partly the emotion, the humor,
Yeah, it's
like
it's Bryant.
laugh out loud funny, and the research she does is
Mm-hmm.
spectacular. Combing the battlefields, all the rest of it. I had her on in the very early days of this show, kind of talking about the challenges of putting it all together. Um, so yeah, I think those would be certainly my top three recommendations there. I'm now going to turn the tables on you, and if you turn around and say Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, I may have to end this broadcast.
No, never. Never. I am okay, so I am cheating slightly in that I am leaning back into that period. My number one answer to this has always been and will always be Pride and Prejudice.
Okay.
Jane Austen is a genius. I adore her work, and Pride and Prejudice is spectacular, and it is it's considered a classic and one of her best, if not her best, for a reason. Although there are others in that Persuasion is delightful, Mansfield Park is hilarious. Her entire oeuvre, but if I have to pick one, it's Pride and Prejudice. What I want to do for my other two, since you've set up three, I'll do three as well. I want to talk about two books by the authors of the series that we've banned, but are not in that series. So, C.S. Forester made his name with the Hornblower series. He also wrote a brilliant single book called The Gun. And The Gun is about a bunch of partisans trying desperately to get an 18-pounder cannon over the mountains to blast the French to hell. And it's brilliant. It's wonderful. It's sort of rather spectacular. And it really does dig in very nicely to the brutality of that war on both sides, on all sides. So I heartily recommend The Gun. The other one, which is my go-to favorite, it's probably the book of his that I've read the most, is a non-sharp Bernard Cornwell called Gallows Thief.
I don't know that one.
Yes. Gallows Thief is about a former captain of the 52nd Light Infantry's Light Company who sells his commission because he's got to do something to keep his mother and awful sister in the manner to which they're accustomed, after his father is discovered to be in massive amounts of debt and takes the coward's way out and shoots himself. and it's about him finding his feet again. And the way he does this is he's offered by Sidmouth a position as an investigator to figure out if a chap who was convicted of killing a countess actually did it. And it is a spectacular look at Britain in around 1817. It's a lot of fun. It's got some great characters. The main character is a guy by the name of Ryder Sandman. He's spectacular. He lives at the Wheat Sheaf, so it's got that sort of class thing going on. I highly, highly recommend that book. He's also a professional cricketer, which adds some hilarity to it. But yeah, well recommended. And honestly, to a certain extent, a searing indictment of the British justice system in the civilian justice system. I'm sorry to say, Zach, in the immediate aftermath of the Peninsular War.
I mean, that's moderately interesting.
Fair point.
That's with reference to the civilian legal system rather than
the
military one. But yeah, interesting. I am not familiar with this.
I highly recommend it.
I am not a dyed-in-the-wool Bernard Cornwell fan. I'm familiar with the Sharp stuff. I read his Stonehenge series actually. Fought, but yeah, I haven't come across that one. Okay, I'm gonna have to add that to my reading list.
Well worth it. And I have to give him credit, because writing that book, there must have been an overwhelming temptation to throw a Sharp cameo or reference in, and he doesn't at all. There's one potential moment that could, in theory, have been there, where he mentions that he was recommended the Wheat Sheaf by a rifle officer, which could be Sharp, but equally could not be Sharp at all. Right? It's open. But one of the things that I will forever give credit to that book for is it has one of my favorite lines of all time in it, which is he'd met that type of this is obviously a summary. He'd met that type of person at all, the people who were obsessed with Waterloo, who thought it was the crowning achievement of British arms. And they all had one thing in common. None of them were there.
He's not talking about us by any chance, is he?
No, he's not. He's talking about a bizarre, degenerate, like sexually assaulting, like baron or duke or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's very, very different. Yes. Well, you talk about cameos. I'm just glad that he doesn't do a Clive Cussler, because Clive Cussler puts Clive Cussler in as a sort of plot twist in almost all, if not every single one of his novels. I mean, if you set aside the fact that Dirk Pitt is basically a rapist, the fact that he just puts himself in those novels is something that always grates on me, and is always kind of gets Dirk Pitt out of a hole at the opportune moment kind of thing. So yeah, at least he doesn't go down that route. Okay, interesting. I'll have to follow up on that and feedback my reactions to you. Shall I let you wrap?
Yeah, I think so. I did actually want to throw one more thing on there, which is we'll talk about this in a future episode, but I've been watching Franklin, which is worth your time. But given the two of our interests, I did want to share one thing, which is probably the best name drop I've seen on television this year, which is randomly the pseudo love interest. It's not. I will say it's actually not very raunchy. They're sort of flirting, but there's nothing else. Is playing the piano or the harpsichord, and Franklin compliments her on it, and she just casually drops that she was tutored in the piano by Boccherini.
As you do.
And that's a name drop that's not going to mean a lot to a lot of people who watch that show. But for the people who do, it does mean something too. That is a hell of a flex.
It is. It certainly is. Yeah. So for a different context, that's like being taught to play the violin by Vivaldi.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's your god tier level of education that you've achieved there.
Exactly. All right, so that brings us to the 2.5-hour end of another State of the Union of Napoleonic history. This is the second coalition. We may have to work on that naming scheme, because after we do 7 of these, we're screwed. Or do we then just turn it into the Concert of Europe?
Yes, that's exactly what we'll do.
That's fair.
Because, of course,
Okay.
the subtitles to this are the most important flaw in what we've just done over the last
Perpetually.
2.5 hours.
Yeah, there's no other flaws in what we've done at all. Gods. All right. So I hope you have enjoyed this. It's been a great time. If you have topics that you'd like us to discuss, let us know. And if you happen to know off the top of your head the correct caliber of a knock gun, also let us know. Write to us at Two Pretentious Twats at the Napoleonic Wars Pod, England, Portsmouth, England. That'll do. But yeah, seriously,
genuinely.
Yeah, do let us. God help us. Do let us know if there's anything you would like us to discuss. We will be back in June, would be my guess. At which point we will probably do something about Waterloo, because neither of us have talked enough about that topic.
Water what? Never heard of it.
Yeah, it's a type of sparkling soda.
I thought it sounded a bit like sort of a public convenience or something.
Yeah, that as well. That as well. All right. Should I let you do the traditional wrap up, Zach?
Oh no, you can do it.
Okay.
You can take the whole. I mean, what you guys haven't. Well, hopefully you have realised is that Luke has basically run this session, not only in the planning of it, but also in terms of the presenting. So, it's not like to the victor go the spoils, because what are the spoils of this podcast? The fact that you get to actually stop recording and get on with your life, that's probably about as close to a victory as you can ever get on my show. But yeah, you're the host. You wrap it up.
All right. So to all of our listeners who are left, thank you so much. Thank you especially to Zach's and by extension my patrons. I will let his pre-recorded list of mentioned in dispatches and etc. afterwards list them. I do not know them all off the top of my head. But as always, friends, stay safe, and thank you for listening.
Folks, do me a favor. Make sure you are following the Napoleonic Wars podcast. Hit that subscribe button so that you can find your way back. And if you're loving the show, please leave a review. Remember, we're in the midst of trying to rebuild after Spotify unplugged us from at least a third of our listener base. So these are all the most powerful things that you can do to help with that recovery. If you want to go that little bit further, remember that there is a Patreon feed. Head to patreon.com/the Napoleonic Wars pod, where you can find a host of perks, from early releases to exclusive content, behind the scenes footage, exclusive meetups, and much more besides. Shout outs to my mentioned in dispatches patrons: Rob Griffith, Brendan Teeling, Beatrice DeGraff, Lynn Dawson, Jamie Kingston, Lucy Tatner, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Stephen Colson, Jim Getz, Stephen Gillen, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Hanscom, Rob Coughlin, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Mark Trowbridge, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramas, Anthony Gumbau, Anonymous American, Martin Pisani, James Fluick, Natasha Hobday, Rod Schwager, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, David Graylick, Ted Andrews, David Milinsky, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Carol Dixon-Smith, Roland Shark, Jason Mohan, Mark Chestnut, and Giovanni. And the Admirals: John Haynes, Ryan Diamond, JC Kaiser, Bob Burnham, Mike Guest, Liam Telfer, Todd and Led Campbell, Rachel Stark, Mark Duckers, David Maxwell, David Priest, Graham Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashworth, Dan Hazelwood, Kate Walcombe, Clemens Beman, Charles McKay, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, and Tim Day. I'll be back very soon, but until then, I'm Zach White. This has been the Napoleonic Wars pod. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Stay well, stay safe, and as always, thank you for listening.